Hello. In this series, we're going to look at a special case of cellular transport. This is osmosis, a case involving the transport of water. To understand this a little better, we look at a solution. A solution consists of a solvent, what does the dissolving, and a solute, what falls apart, what is the solid, what is dissolved in the solvent. For living things, the solvent pretty much all the time is going to be H2O. So think of it as H2O every time. Now things will diffuse. Diffusion is a net movement of molecules down the concentration gradient. So things diffuse from where they're highly concentrated to where they're not concentrated, or they might not be there at all. So they diffuse over to that space. Molecules can move both ways along the gradient, but net movement, the overall movement, okay, net movement or overall movement, is from high to low. Once it reaches this state, it's in equilibrium, when that net movement stops. So the particles are spread out evenly, it stops, and now it's in equilibrium. With no gradient. Things that can affect the gradient: temperature, pressure, currents, the size of the molecule that's diffusing, all these things affect the rate of diffusion. Okay? So just looking at this for a minute, here's a dye in a goldfish bowl. You drop the dye in, here it's a solid. The solid starts to come off as the water molecules interact with it. The water molecules dissolve it, and now it becomes the solute. So here we've got the dye is the solute, and the water is the solvent. Okay? And over time, it diffuses more and more into the bowl until it's finally distributed uniformly across the whole bowl, across the whole volume of water. This is important because this is part of what allows transport in a membrane. So the passive transport we're talking about occurs because there's a gradient. So in order for the cell to not use energy to pull something in, or to allow it to come in, there has to be a gradient. A special case of diffusion comes from osmosis. This is of water. We talked about water being a smaller molecule that goes across the membrane. Water will freely go across. This, though, when we look at osmosis, what we're looking at is the solvent. So if we have a solution, all right, with particles in it, say a salt water solution. So you dissolve some salt in water, you got a salt water solution. There's salt in there and water in there. So usually we think of things in terms of how much salt did you put in there. But osmosis looks at, well, how much water is there in there? How much water is in there? Here there creates a diffusion as well. And diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane has the water moving towards the higher concentration. All right? Just like over here, the water moved towards the higher concentration. All right? And now it moves away from the lower concentration because it wants to help this diffusion occur, this total diffusion. Can't do that unless it moves. So water moves too. Water can diffuse. Here we're talking about a selectively permeable membrane to water. We look at a situation where just water gets through. Water can diffuse both ways across, but the solute cannot. Remember the things we looked at. A lot of things can't get across, but water can. Net movement of water is toward low water. So where there's low water concentration, or a high solute, high sugar, salt, whatever it is, high solute, but low water concentration, the movement moves towards that. The water moves towards that. This is called osmotic pressure. The whole process is osmosis, and it's osmotic pressure that pulls the water in. So here we have a beaker full of a substance, a solution, and it's sitting with an open end in it, but a permeable, semi-permeable membrane. That membrane will let water through, but nothing else, right? Put that in a tank of lower percentage of solute, so 5% around it, 10% inside. The water's going to want to go into where the 10% is. Why? It's following its gradient. There's more water on the outside, less water on the inside, the flask on the inside. So the water wants to go in there to even out things, to reach equilibrium. So the water goes in. Well, it doesn't all go in. All right, there's other forces at work here, gravity and such, air pressure, whatever. So it doesn't all go in, but you can see by the level here, that it does change, that water does go in. It actually adds to the volume of the interior. So here we have a solution of water. So a volume of water with a semi-permeable membrane in the center. All right, so the water molecules are moving around and they will freely move. Now, I'm going to add salt to it. So if I add salt to one side of it, all right, that's going to draw the water over to the side. The water's going to want to go over here on this side to even out the concentration, because there's less water over here, more water over here. It's going to follow its concentration. So this leads cells to be sitting in solutions of water that are isotonic, hypotonic, or hypertonic. What do they mean? Isotonic. Iso means the same. So it's got the same amount of water on the outside of the cell as what's inside the cell. All right? So there's no gain. Water doesn't move in or out. Hypotonic solution. Concentration of solute in the solution is lower than inside the cell. So it's lower inside the cell. Okay? Concentration of the solute in the solution is lower inside the cell. So there's more water outside the cell. More water in the solution outside the cell. This means that the water is going to go into the cell and make it swell. Might even make it burst. Some forms of life have a cell wall. Plants is one. Plants have water flood into its cells. They swell up, push against the cell walls, and this is what makes a plant stand up when you give it water. When it's gone or when it's low on water, it'll wilt because there's less water inside there pushing against the cell walls, making it stand up straight. In a hypertonic solution, concentration of solute is higher in the solution than inside the cell, right? So now there's more water, more water inside the cell, in the solution inside the cell, than outside. So the water is going to want to move from in the cell to outside the cell. When it does that, it's going to make the cell shrink up a little bit, all right? This is it's called crenation in animal cells. And for plants, again, it's what causes plants to wilt. They're gone, but there's less water, so it's not pushing against the sides, making it stand up. So here's just a look at that, animal cells. So water will freely move across. Water follows a gradient, all on its own. It goes through porins. Porin is one way to let things through the cell. And I thank you.